Dread horror, uncover the darkest mysteries that remain unsolved. If you dare, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying story. It was St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, and the city was alive with celebration. Tourists and locals alike crowded into pubs, their laughter and voices blending with the sound of fiddles and clinking glasses. Among the revelers was a group of 4 American friends, Daniel, Mark, Lisa, and Emily, who had traveled to Ireland to experience an authentic pub crawl. They started the night at the Brazen Head, Ireland's oldest pub, where they toasted to their adventure with pints of Guinness. As the night wore on, they stumbled from one pub to another, following a loosely planned route. Somewhere along the way, a stranger in a dark green coat approached them. His face was gaunt, his smile unsettling. "You lot looking for a real Irish experience?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the crowd. Daniel, always up for something different, nodded eagerly. "Of course, that's why we're here." The stranger's smile widened. "There's a place, not on any tourist map. You want to see a real Irish pub? Follow me." Something about him was off, but the group was drunk and caught up in the spirit of the night. Without questioning, they followed him down a narrow alleyway. The further they walked, the quieter the streets became. The sounds of Dublin's festivities faded behind them until only the wind whispered through the empty streets. At last, they arrived at an old stone building with a wooden sign above the door. The name was worn away with time. The stranger pushed open the heavy door, and warm, flickering candlelight spilled out. The air inside smelled of aged whiskey and damp wood. The pub was eerily quiet despite being full of patrons. People sat hunched over their drinks, talking in hushed voices. A slow, haunting fiddle tune played from somewhere unseen. The bartender, an older man with hollow eyes, greeted them with a knowing smile. Lisa hesitated. "This place is weird," Mark laughed, nudging her. "Come on, it's just an old-fashioned pub. It's part of the experience." They ordered drinks and found a booth in the corner. The stranger had vanished, and no one had seen him leave. As they drank, a creeping unease settled over them. Emily leaned in. "Has anyone else noticed that no one here is speaking above a whisper?" Daniel shrugged. "Maybe they're just old school." But then, they noticed something stranger. The clock on the wall had not moved since they arrived. The candles never seemed to burn lower, and the faces of the other patrons, though blurred by shadow, looked strangely familiar, as if they had seen them before in old photographs. Lisa gripped Mark's arm. "We should go. Now." Mark, still trying to act brave, waved her off. But when he turned back to his drink, his face paled. His reflection in the bar mirror was missing. Panic surged through them. Daniel stood abruptly. "We're leaving." As they hurried toward the door, the bartender's voice stopped them. "You can't leave." The entire pub fell silent. Every patron turned to stare at them, their hollow eyes glinting in the candlelight. The bartender stepped forward, his smile stretching unnaturally wide. "You've already joined us." The group turned and bolted for the door, yanking it open. Cold night air hit them as they stumbled back onto the cobblestone street. But when they looked back, the pub was gone. In its place stood an abandoned, crumbling building, its windows shattered, its door rotting on its hinges. A plaque on the wall, barely visible in the dim light, read, "McCullen's Pub, established 1832. Closed after the mysterious disappearance of all patrons on St. Patrick's Night, 1903. Their blood ran cold. They ran without stopping, without looking back, until they reached the crowded streets again. No one believed them. No one had ever heard of the pub they described. But when they checked their phones later, their pictures from that night showed something horrifying. In every photo behind them, the shadowy patrons of the vanished pub stared directly at the camera, smiling. It was St. Patrick's Day, and Megan had always been fascinated by Irish folklore. When she stumbled upon an old antique shop in a quiet Dublin alley, she couldn't resist stepping inside. The shop smelled of aged wood and something damp, something ancient. Trinkets and relics cluttered the dimly lit shelves, their golden glints catching the flickering candlelight. An elderly shopkeeper, his eyes milky with age, emerged from the shadows. "Looking for something special, lass?" he rasped. Megan smiled nervously. "Just browsing. I love Irish myths." The old man's cracked lips curled into a knowing grin. "Then perhaps you'd be interested in this." He reached beneath the counter and retrieved a small, delicate locket. When he pried it open, a perfectly preserved four-leaf clover lay inside. Unlike any Megan had ever seen, its leaves were dark, almost black, as though soaked in ink. "A true rarity," the old man whispered. "A cursed clover, passed down for centuries. Legend says whoever possesses it is granted luck, but at a terrible price." Megan chuckled, thinking it was just a sales tactic. She was a firm skeptic but couldn't deny the eerie charm of the trinket. "How much?" The shopkeeper hesitated. "It's not for sale, but if it has chosen you, it's yours. Just remember, never lose it." A chill ran down Megan's spine as she took the locket. That night, as she celebrated with friends, she kept it close to her chest, amused by the old man's ominous warning. The first stroke of luck came almost immediately. She won a pub raffle, scoring free drinks for the night. Then, as she walked home, she narrowly avoided a speeding car that swerved at the last second. "Maybe this thing really is lucky," she mused. But the luck turned dark the next morning. She awoke to frantic knocking on her door. It was her neighbor, pale and shaking. "Did you hear about Ryan?" he gasped. He was hit by a car last night, right outside this building." Megan froze. She had been walking past that exact spot. Had it been meant for her? Coincidence, surely. But the coincidences continued. That day at work, she got an unexpected promotion. Her boss suddenly stepping down due to a freak accident. As she processed the news, her phone vibrated. Another friend, someone who had been with her at the pub the night before, had fallen down the stairs, breaking their leg. Her hands trembled as she clutched the locket. Was it truly luck, or something else? Determined to rid herself of it, she returned to the antique shop. But when she arrived, the alley was different. The shop was gone. In its place stood only a bricked-up doorway, its edges blackened with age. No sign, no trace that it had ever existed. Megan's heart pounded. Desperate, she tried to discard the locket, throwing it into the river. Yet that night, she woke to find it on her nightstand, damp, as if retrieved from the water. Then the nightmares began. Shadows flickered at the edge of her vision. Whispers crept through the silence, hissing her name. And always, in her dreams, she saw the old shopkeeper's face, watching, grinning. One by one, the people closest to her suffered strange misfortunes. A friend's house burned down. A coworker suffered a stroke. Megan stopped answering calls, isolating herself in fear. The weight of the locket around her neck felt heavier each day. She spent hours researching folklore, desperate for an answer. Hidden in an obscure forum, she found a chilling passage. The Cursed Clover bestows great fortune, but for each stroke of luck, another must suffer. To be free, one must pass it on, willingly accepted, never stolen, never lost. Megan's stomach twisted. The shopkeeper hadn't sold it to her. He had given it to her. The cycle had to continue. That night, she went to a crowded bar and struck up conversation with a tourist. She told him a charming story about an Irish lucky charm. He laughed, intrigued, as she placed the locket in his palm. As she walked away, she heard his voice behind her. "Hey, you forgot this." She turned with a forced smile. "No, it's yours now." The moment he tucked it into his pocket, an immense weight lifted from Megan's shoulders. The whispers stopped. The air felt lighter. As she stepped onto the bustling streets, she felt free for the first time in weeks. But deep down, she knew, somewhere the curse had begun anew. Liam had always hated the quiet countryside of his grandfather's farm. Every year, his family insisted on visiting for St. Patrick's Day, and every year, he dreaded the long, boring days spent in the middle of nowhere. This time, however, something felt different. The air was colder, the fields eerily silent, and his grandfather seemed uneasy. "You stay out of the old Shamrock field, boy," his grandfather warned on the first night. "There's something there that doesn't take kindly to strangers." Liam scoffed at the superstition but couldn't ignore the strange look in his grandfather's eyes. The old man was serious. That night, as the wind howled through the farmhouse, Liam heard something. A whisper, faint, almost melodic, weaving through the rustling of the trees. He sat up in bed, listening. The sound was coming from outside. Curiosity got the best of him. Pulling on his coat, he stepped out into the chilly night. The moon cast an eerie glow over the fields, illuminating the rolling hills in a pale, ghostly light. The Shamrock field lay beyond the barn, untouched, overgrown, and strangely darker than the rest of the landscape. As he neared, the whispers grew louder. They weren't carried by the wind, they were coming from the ground. A chill ran down his spine, but Liam pressed on. His foot hit something solid. He looked down and saw a stone slab, partially covered by the dense shamrocks. Kneeling, he brushed them aside and found an inscription worn with time. "Here lies the unseen one. May it never wake." His breath hitched. The whispers turned to laughter, low, guttural, and wrong. The shamrocks around him began to wither, curling into blackened husks. Something moved beneath him. Liam scrambled backward as the ground shifted, as if something beneath was stirring. A skeletal hand shot through the dirt, fingers grasping at the night air. He let out a strangled cry as more emerged, arms, faces, hollow eyes filled with an unnatural hunger. He ran. The laughter chased him, a chorus of unseen mouths mocking his terror. He didn't stop until he reached the farmhouse, slamming the door behind him. His grandfather was already waiting, his face grim. "You woke it, didn't you?" I didn't mean to," Liam stammered. The old man sighed, gripping Liam's shoulders. "Listen to me, boy. You have to end it before sunrise." Liam's stomach twisted. "How?" His grandfather handed him an old lantern and a bundle of dried herbs. "Go back. Burn the shamrocks. Seal the ground." Every fiber of his being screamed at him to refuse, but the weight in his grandfather's gaze left no room for argument. With shaking hands, he returned to the field. The ground pulsed like a living thing, and the whispers had grown into a deafening cacophony. He struck a match, dropping it onto the dried herbs. The fire roared to life, its glow unnatural, hungry. The earth trembled as the flames consumed the shamrocks. A piercing shriek filled the air. Shadows writhed, twisting and clawing as if in agony. The ground buckled, then caved in on itself, dragging the horrors back into the abyss. Then silence. The fire died out, leaving only scorched earth and the heavy scent of something ancient and angry. The whispers were gone. Liam staggered back to the farmhouse, where his grandfather waited. "It's done." Liam nodded, his hands still trembling. His grandfather exhaled, eyes filled with sorrow. "Until the next fool wakes it." The next morning, Liam left the farm without looking back, vowing never to return. But as the car rumbled down the dirt road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a second, he saw the shamrocks blooming once more. Daniel and Aaron had always loved the thrill of exploring abandoned places. Every St. Patrick's Day, they made it a tradition to find a new haunted location and test their bravery. This year, their research led them to Blackthorn Swamp, a desolate marshland on the outskirts of town, where an old legend spoke of a cursed scarecrow that guarded the land. "They say it moves when you're not looking," Aaron read aloud from an online forum as they drove through the misty backroads. "And if it ever turns to face you, you don't get to leave." Daniel chuckled nervously. "That's just a story, right?" The road leading to the swamp was barely visible through the thick fog. Trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. As they neared their destination, an eerie silence settled over the woods. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the distant sound of water bubbling somewhere deep in the marsh. They parked near an old fence, the wood rotting and covered in moss. Beyond it lay a vast expanse of marshland, its tall grass swaying despite the absence of wind. A narrow dirt path wound its way through the reeds, leading toward a single, lonely figure in the distance. The Scarecrow, dressed in tattered clothes, its burlap sack head was tilted slightly downward, its stitched mouth twisted into a crooked smile. The wooden post it was nailed to was splintered and old, as if it had been there for centuries. But what sent a shiver down Aaron's spine were the eyes, two hollow, black voids that seemed to drink in the moonlight. Daniel took a step forward, raising his camera. "Let's get a closer look." As they approached, something moved in the corner of Aaron's vision, a shadow darting through the reeds. She spun around, her flashlight cutting through the mist, but there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" Daniel asked, lowering his camera. A cold gust of wind suddenly rushed past them, carrying a faint whisper, low, unintelligible, but undeniably there. The reeds around them rustled, though the air had gone still once more. Daniel hesitated. "Maybe we should." A loud snap echoed from behind them. They whirled around. The Scarecrow had turned. His head was no longer tilted downward. It was now looking straight at them. Aaron gasped, stumbling backward. "No way. That wasn't like that before." Daniel's hands trembled as he pointed his camera at it. "Maybe the wind." The Scarecrow twitched. Not the wind. Not their imagination. It moved. Without thinking, they bolted. The reeds closed in around them as they sprinted back toward the car, the ground sucking at their feet like quicksand. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, chanting. Shadows darted through the fog, watching, waiting. Then Aaron tripped. Daniel skidded to a stop, turning back. "Get up!" She looked up, and her heart nearly stopped. The Scarecrow was closer. It now stood just a few feet away, its head tilted once more, but this time the crooked smile had widened. The stitches had begun to fray, revealing something writhing beneath the burlap. Aaron screamed. Daniel yanked her to her feet, and they ran harder than ever before. The whispers turned to laughter, guttural and inhuman, echoing from every direction. The trees twisted, their branches reaching for them like skeletal hands. The ground beneath them shifted as if something was writhing just below the surface. The car. It was so close. They reached it, fumbling with the doors, throwing themselves inside. Daniel turned the key, nothing. He tried again. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Then came the tapping. Slow, rhythmic, scraping against the window. Erin refused to look. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a prayer, while Daniel's breath came in panicked gasps. The tapping stopped. For a moment, silence. Then the car lights flickered. Through the rearview mirror, Daniel saw it. The Scarecrow was right behind them, standing in the middle of the road, its burlap sack head now split open. Inside, something pulsed. A twisted, gaping maw filled with rotting teeth, its hollow eyes bleeding black ichor. Daniel slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Come on! Come on!" The car roared to life. They didn't hesitate. Daniel floored it, tires screeching as they peeled away, leaving the Scarecrow behind. But the laughter followed them, growing fainter but never truly fading. They didn't stop driving until they reached the highway, where the lights of civilization welcomed them back to reality. Only then did they dare to breathe. Aaron shuddered. "We're never talking about this again." Daniel nodded, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Agreed. The next morning, they checked the footage on Daniel's camera. The Scarecrow was in every shot, even the ones where it shouldn't have been. John and Emily had always dreamed of living in the countryside. When they found a beautiful, yet affordable, home near Black Hollow Road, they couldn't believe their luck. The house sat on a large plot of land, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch for miles. The previous owner had left abruptly, selling the house for much less than its worth, but the couple thought nothing of it. until the strange occurrences began. It started with the whispers. One late evening, Emily was sitting by the living room window, enjoying the peaceful sounds of the crickets outside. John had gone into town to pick up groceries, leaving her alone for the first time in their new home. The air was crisp, and the moon cast eerie silver streaks through the trees. That's when she heard it. A faint, raspy whisper coming from just beyond the glass. At first, she thought it was the wind rustling the leaves, but as she listened closely, she realized that it wasn't the wind at all. It was a voice, a woman's voice, whispering her name. Emily. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound sent shivers crawling down her spine. She turned toward the window, but saw nothing in the darkness. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, but before she could call John, the whisper came again, closer this time. Emily, help me. The voice was weak, pleading, summoning every ounce of courage she had. Emily stood and walked cautiously toward the window. She pressed her face against the glass and peered out into the darkness. That's when she saw it. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the moonlight. It was the outline of a woman, her hair hanging over her face, her body slightly hunched as if in pain. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs as she reached for the porch light switch. The second the light flooded the yard, the figure vanished. John arrived home minutes later to find Emily trembling, her face pale. She tried to explain what had happened, but he dismissed it as nerves from being alone in a new house. That night, however, he, too, was awakened by the sound of whispers outside their bedroom window. The next few weeks were filled with unease. Shadows moved in their peripheral vision. Whispers called their names at odd hours, and the couple constantly felt as though they were being watched. One morning, they discovered footprints in the dewy grass outside their bedroom window. Small, bare footprints leading from the forest to their home. But there were no return tracks. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily dove into research about the area's history. What she found made her blood run cold. Decades ago, a young woman named Margaret Holloway had disappeared on Black Hollow Road. She was last seen walking home from town, never to be found again. Some claimed she had run away, but others believed something far more sinister had happened. Legends whispered that her ghost still roamed the woods, searching for help. One night, determined to put an end to the torment, John and Emily set up a camera outside their home, facing the woods. They left it running overnight, hoping to capture whatever or whoever was haunting them. The next morning, they hesitated before playing the footage. The video showed the quiet, darkened yard for hours, until around 3:14 a.m., when the motion sensor light suddenly flickered on. The screen remained still for a moment. Then, from the darkness of the woods, the figure of a woman emerged. Her movements were unnatural, almost jerky, as if she were being controlled by invisible strings. She approached the window, her head tilting slightly, her long hair hiding most of her face. But then, in a sudden, horrifying motion, she turned toward the camera. Her face, or what should have been her face, was a dark void. No eyes, no mouth, just emptiness. And then the camera cut to static. That was the final straw. John and Emily packed their bags that morning and left Black Hollow Road for good. Months later, when they finally spoke to the new homeowners out of curiosity, they were met with an unsettling response. "We've been hearing whispers at night," the man said, his face pale. "A woman's voice, calling our names." It started as a game. Brian and his friends had always been drawn to the macabre, urban legends, abandoned buildings, and ghost stories. Every Halloween, they had a tradition. Visit the scariest place they could find and stay until dawn. Most of the time, it was all just fun. Cheap scares, eerie atmospheres, and the occasional jump scare from a raccoon in the dark. But that year, they picked Ravenswood Cemetery. Unlike their previous excursions, this cemetery had a reputation that even the bravest locals refused to challenge. Stories whispered of a tall, faceless figure that roamed the grounds after midnight. Those who had encountered it reported an overwhelming sense of dread, nausea, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Some said they had seen it move without footsteps, gliding like a shadow through the mist, and a few never returned at all. Of course, Brian and his friends dismissed these tales as superstitions. Ghost stories always had a way of growing more elaborate with time. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and an overconfident sense of adventure, they arrived at the cemetery just before midnight. The iron gates were rusted, half open, creaking as the wind blew through the trees. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and old stone. Gravestones jutted out from the earth like jagged teeth, some broken, others leaning at unnatural angles. "This place is definitely creepy," Jason muttered, shining his flashlight ahead. "Exactly why we're here," Brian grinned. "Let's go." As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, unnaturally so. Every few steps, the wind carried faint whispers, but when they stopped to listen, silence returned. "I swear I just heard something," Anna whispered. "Probably the wind," Mark replied, though his voice lacked confidence. Their cameras recorded everything. Tombstones illuminated by their flashlights, statues worn by time, and the creeping fog that thickened around them. Then they saw it. Near an old, decrepit mausoleum, a figure stood perfectly still. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form barely distinguishable from the shadows. It did not move, did not shift, but it was there. Anna gasped. "Is that?" The flashlight beam flickered over it, and they all saw the same thing. The figure had no face, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, pale skin stretched across where its features should have been. And then, it started moving. It didn't walk, it glided. 1 second, it was near the mausoleum. The next, closer. Jason yelped, stepping back. "What the hell?" The air grew heavy, pressing down on them like an unseen force. Mark dropped his camera, his breathing ragged. A nauseating pressure wrapped around them, making their stomachs twist. Then the whispers returned. But this time they came from inside their heads. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong. Deep, layered, ancient. Brian felt something cold brush against his arm, yet no one was near him. His flashlight flickered and then died. The thing took another step closer. Still faceless, still watching. Panic set in. "Run!" Anna screamed. They turned and bolted, weaving between graves, dodging broken tombstones. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The fog thickened, blurring their surroundings. Jason tripped, crashing to the ground. Brian turned back, grabbing his arm, pulling him up. But Jason's eyes were wide, his face twisted in horror. Brian followed his gaze. The faceless man was standing inches away. Jason screamed. The sound cut off abruptly as if stolen from his throat. He collapsed, gasping, clutching his chest like he couldn't breathe. The others grabbed him, dragging him away as fast as they could. When they finally reached the cemetery gates, Brian chanced one last look. The figure stood at a distance now, unmoving, watching, waiting. Then it slowly raised a hand and pointed directly at him. The moment his foot crossed the cemetery's threshold, the pressure lifted. The whispers stopped, but something was still wrong. For days after, Jason was sick. His voice never fully returned. Doctors called it psychogenic aphonia, a sudden, unexplained loss of voice due to psychological trauma. The others tried to forget, convincing themselves it was all just a trick of the mind, a mass hallucination, until Brian started seeing things. It began subtly, a flicker in the mirror, a shadow in his peripheral vision, the feeling of something standing just behind him. One night, as he was reviewing the cemetery footage, his blood ran cold. At one point in the video, as they were running, the camera caught something impossible. There was a second faceless figure, standing among the tombstones, watching, and it was not the one near the mausoleum. Brian's breath hitched. He played the footage again, frame by frame. At the very end of the video, the figure had moved. It was no longer in the cemetery. It was in the background of his living room. That night, Brian barely slept. The air in his apartment felt too still, too thick. Every noise made him jolt upright, expecting to see something standing in the dark. At exactly 3:14 a.m., his phone buzzed, a notification from his security camera. Brian's hand trembled as he opened the live feed. The screen showed his empty living room. First, then the motion-activated camera flickered. A tall, faceless figure stood in the doorway. It did not move, did not breathe. It simply stood there, waiting, and then the camera cut to static. Brian was never seen again. His apartment was found abandoned, his belongings untouched. His front door was unlocked, his phone left on the floor, its battery drained. The only clue was his laptop still open. The screen displayed the last frame of his security footage. The faceless man, standing just inches from the camera, closer than before, and this time, there was more than one. Mark, Anna, and Jason tried to move on. They told themselves Brian had just run away, unable to cope with whatever happened that night. But each of them started seeing the same figure, in reflections, in empty hallways, at the foot of their beds at night. One by one they disappeared. No bodies, no explanations, just an empty apartment, an open laptop, and the last image ever captured. The faceless man, standing closer, watching, waiting, for the next victim. Late one evening, Marcus, a seasoned rideshare driver, pulled onto Hollowbrook Highway, a long stretch of road known for its desolation. The night was colder than usual, the mist thick enough to blur the outlines of trees lining the highway. He had driven this route dozens of times before, but tonight, something felt different. An unsettling stillness hung in the air. His fingers tapped idly on the steering wheel as he waited for his next ride request. Then his phone chimed. Pickup request. The location was odd. A pin dropped on a quiet roadside in the middle of nowhere. He frowned, glancing at the map. No houses, no buildings, just trees and endless road. He hesitated before accepting the ride. Maybe someone's car had broken down. As he approached the pickup point, his headlights cut through the fog, revealing a lone figure standing by the edge of the road. A woman. She was dressed in a pale, old-fashioned gown that clung to her form as if damp from the mist. Long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, obscuring part of her face. She wasn't waving him down, wasn't moving at all. She simply stood there, motionless, waiting. Marcus pulled over and lowered the passenger window. Need a ride? His voice sounded too loud in the suffocating silence. The woman slowly turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent in the glow of his headlights. Her lips barely moved as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, thank you. There was something strange about her presence, but Marcus ignored the nagging feeling in his gut. Maybe she had been stranded for a while and was just cold. He unlocked the door. She slipped inside without a word, settling into the back seat with eerie stillness. Where are you headed? He asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She gave him an address he didn't recognize, but he punched it into his GPS. It was far, deep into the countryside, the kind of place no one would request a ride to this late at night. As he pulled onto the highway, he tried making small talk to ease the tension. You from around here? Silence. Marcus glanced at the mirror again. The woman was staring out the window, her face unreadable. The way she sat was unnerving, too still, too rigid. The GPS directed him off the highway onto a narrower road. The trees grew thicker, the streetlights disappeared, and darkness swallowed them whole. The silence was suffocating. He tried again. Rough night. This time she responded, her voice hollow. I was in an accident. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He wasn't sure why, but the way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Oh, that's awful. Are you okay? Pause. Then, no. Something about the way she said it, so final, so cold, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Marcus checked the GPS. Only a few miles to go. Just get her there, he told himself. The car's interior felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped. His breath fogged slightly in the air. He reached for the heat controls but stopped when he noticed something in the mirror. The woman's reflection was wrong. She was still staring out the window, but in the mirror, her head was turned toward him. Watching him, his heart slammed against his ribs. He swallowed hard and focused on the road. "We're almost there," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The final turn led to an old, abandoned house. The structure was barely standing, its windows shattered, vines creeping up the rotting wood. No lights, no signs of life. This is your stop?" She didn't respond. Marcus turned in his seat. The back seat was empty. His breath hitched. The car doors had never opened. There had been no sound, no movement. She was just gone. A deep, bone-chilling cold settled over him. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone, looking back at the GPS history. The trip was still active, but there was no drop-off location anymore. Just static on the screen. Then the radio crackled. A soft whisper slithered through the static. "Help me." Marcus's blood ran cold. He slammed the car into reverse, tires skidding on the gravel as he sped away from the house. He didn't stop, didn't look back, not until he was miles away, safe under the glow of streetlights. When he finally gathered the courage to check his rideshare history, the trip was gone. No record of the pickup, no record of the passenger. It was as if she had never existed. But Marcus knew better. She was still out there, waiting for her next ride. Lisa and her husband, Mark, had been searching for their dream home for months when they stumbled upon Ashwood Manor. The Victorian house stood tall, its once grand architecture now slightly weathered by time, but it held a certain charm that Lisa instantly fell in love with. Mark was more hesitant. Something about the house unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The realtor assured them it had a rich history, but nothing sinister. They moved in on a crisp autumn day. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and the golden sunlight bathed the house in a warm glow. As Lisa unpacked in the master bedroom, she felt a strange sense of nostalgia, as if she had been there before. The feeling was fleeting, and she brushed it off as excitement over their new home. That night, as they settled into bed, Lisa was awoken by a faint sound, a soft, muffled sob. She sat up, listening carefully. It was distant, almost as if coming from another part of the house. She nudged Mark, who was fast asleep. Shaking off the unease, she convinced herself it was just the house settling or perhaps a distant noise from outside. The next night, the crying returned, clearer this time. A child's weeping, fragile and heart-wrenching, echoed through the halls. Lisa followed the sound down the dark corridor, the wooden floor creaking beneath her bare feet. The crying seemed to be coming from the attic. Hesitating for a moment, she placed her hand on the old brass doorknob and turned it. The attic door creaked open, revealing a space shrouded in darkness. The sobbing ceased immediately. Lisa's breath hitched as she scanned the empty room. Dust motes floated in the moonlight, filtering through a small, round window. Nothing seemed out of place. Just old furniture, trunks, and forgotten relics of the past. Then, just as she was about to close the door, she saw it. A small rocking chair in the corner began to sway ever so slightly, the creaking sound unnervingly rhythmic. Lisa's skin prickled with an unseen chill. She slammed the door shut and hurried back to bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The following morning, she told Mark about what she had heard. He laughed it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. Determined to prove to herself that she wasn't losing her mind, Lisa decided to do some research on Ashwood Manor. At the town's historical archives, she unearthed an old newspaper article that made her blood run cold. Decades ago, a family had lived in Ashwood Manor, a couple and their young daughter Eleanor. The child had vanished without a trace one winter night. The parents searched desperately, but she was never found. Some believed she had wandered into the woods and succumbed to the cold, while others whispered darker theories, ones involving the house itself. That night, the weeping returned, louder and more desperate than before. Lisa, armed with a flashlight, resolved to find the source once and for all. She climbed the attic stairs, each step heavier with dread. The moment she pushed the door open, a chill washed over her, so cold it made her breath visible. The rocking chair was moving again, but this time it wasn't empty. A small figure sat curled in the chair, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lisa's flashlight flickered, but in the dim light, she could make out the tattered white dress and long, matted hair obscuring the child's face. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but something about the girl seemed sorrowful rather than threatening. Lisa took a cautious step forward. "Eleanor?" she whispered. The sobbing stopped. The child lifted her head slowly, revealing a face so pale it seemed almost translucent. But where her eyes should have been, there were only two empty, black sockets. Lisa let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward. The girl's mouth opened, releasing an ear-piercing wail that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Lisa turned and ran, slamming the attic door behind her. She barely slept that night, her mind racing with fear and questions. What had happened to Eleanor? Why was she still here? The next day, Lisa searched the house for any clues, checking every nook and cranny. Behind an old bookshelf in the study, she found something strange. A small, rusted metal box wedged between the wooden panels. With trembling hands, she pried it open. Inside were faded photographs of Eleanor and her parents, a lock of blonde hair tied with a ribbon, and a folded letter, yellowed with age. The letter, written in shaky handwriting, was a confession. Eleanor had not wandered into the woods. She had been locked in the attic by her own mother, who had gone mad with paranoia, convinced that her child was possessed. The girl had cried for days, begging to be let out, until the house finally fell silent. Lisa felt sick. The sobbing she had been hearing, it wasn't just a lingering echo of the past. It was Eleanor's agony, trapped in time, reliving her final moments. That night, Lisa and Mark made the decision to leave Ashwood Manor. But before they did, Lisa returned to the attic one last time. She placed the rusted box on the rocking chair and whispered, "I'm sorry." The air in the room shifted, as if something unseen had lifted. The rocking chair creaked one final time before coming to a standstill. As they drove away from the house, Lisa glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the attic window watching them go was a small figure in a white dress. And for the first time, there were no more tears. The road to Pinecrest Lodge wound through dense, towering pines, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead like skeletal fingers. The deeper the group drove into the forest, the more the sunlight faded, swallowed by the thick canopy. The old lodge had been abandoned for decades before it was reopened as a remote getaway, advertised as an escape from modern life. For Daniel and his friends Mia, James, and Olivia, that was the appeal. A weekend free from cell service, work stress, and the noise of the city sounded perfect. The lodge itself was massive, its wooden exterior darkened by time and weather. It sat on the edge of a misty lake, its still waters reflecting the fading light of the setting sun. As they unloaded their bags, the air felt unnaturally still, as if the very forest was holding its breath. Mia shivered, brushing off the unease creeping up her spine. "It's just the isolation," she muttered to herself. Inside, the lodge was rustic but comfortable. Stone fireplace, antique furniture, the faint scent of aged wood and dust lingering in the air. A guest book lay open on the check-in counter. Daniel flipped through it, noticing that the last recorded visit had been nearly a year ago. He frowned. "Guess this place isn't as popular as they claim." That night, after a few drinks by the fireplace, the group retired to their rooms. Daniel's was on the second floor, its only window overlooking the darkened lake. He lay in bed, listening to the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. Sleep came fitfully. Then something stirred, a whisper of movement in the room. His breath hitched as he turned his head. At the foot of his bed stood a figure. It was tall, shrouded in darkness, its limbs unnaturally long, fingers twitching slightly. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, as if studying him. Daniel wanted to scream, wanted to move, but his body was paralyzed, his limbs frozen under the weight of an unseen force. The figure didn't breathe, didn't move closer, only stood, its presence suffocating, pressing down on him like a leaden weight. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it melted back into the shadows. Daniel gasped as control returned to his body. He scrambled for his phone, flicking on the flashlight and sweeping it over the room. Empty. His heart thundered in his chest. Just a nightmare, that's all. He lay back down, telling himself the darkness had played tricks on him. At breakfast, Olivia noticed his pale face. Rough night. Daniel hesitated. Just weird dreams. James smirked. You mean like a ghost? Don't joke, Mia muttered, stirring her coffee. This place gives me the creeps. They tried to shake off the tension, spending the day hiking through the woods, taking photos of the mist-covered lake. As evening fell, they built a fire outside, sharing stories and laughter. The lodge felt less sinister under the flickering glow of the flames. That night, Daniel wasn't the only one who saw it. Olivia woke to the feeling of being watched. The room was pitch black, save for the faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed the open closet door. She was sure she had closed it before bed. Then she saw it. A shadow within the shadows. A figure standing inside the closet, its form blending with the darkness, its elongated fingers twitching ever so slightly. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The figure slowly leaned forward, its head tilting in that same unnatural way. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The closet door creaked shut on its own. The next morning, Olivia refused to speak about what had happened. She looked exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her coffee. Daniel noticed and, after a long moment, whispered, "You saw it too, didn't you?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Determined to put their fears to rest, James suggested they search the lodge. Maybe it's some weird optical illusion, or hell, maybe we're just psyching ourselves out. Together, they combed through the rooms, checking closets, attics, and storage spaces. Most were empty until they reached the basement. The air down there was different, heavy, wrong. Dust motes floated in the dim light as they moved deeper into the space. Old furniture was stacked haphazardly, covered in decaying sheets. Against the far wall stood an old wooden door, its surface scratched and worn. James hesitated before pushing it open. Inside was a small, windowless room, and in the center of the room was a single chair. Strapped to the chair were old, rusted restraints. The air turned icy. A sense of something watching pressed down on them. Then Mia let out a strangled gasp, pointing to the walls. Scratches. Dozens of them. Some shallow, some deep, all frantic, desperate. Let me out. Still here. I see it when I close my eyes. Daniel's stomach twisted. We need to leave. They didn't argue. That night no one slept. The oppressive feeling in the lodge grew unbearable. Shadows shifted where they shouldn't. The floor creaked with unseen footsteps, and at precisely 3:14 a.m., the doors to every room creaked open on their own. Mia's shaky whisper filled the silence. It's in here. Daniel's breath turned ragged as a deep, suffocating presence filled the air. The shadows in the room thickened. Then they saw it. The figure standing just beyond the doorway, its long fingers twitching, its head tilting ever so slightly. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. A silent message filled the air, unspoken yet clear. Get out. They didn't waste another second. The car tires screeched against the gravel as they sped away, the lodge shrinking in the rearview mirror. Daniel's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, Olivia sobbing quietly in the back seat. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silent watcher of Pinecrest Lodge had let them leave. But none of them ever forgot the feeling of those empty, unblinking eyes staring at them from the dark. A small, seemingly innocent wine box, but it holds a terrifying power that surpasses anything most people can imagine. No one really knows how long this box has existed, but the story began in the early 2000s when a woman named Haviva, an antique collector, found it at a flea market in Spain. The box was sealed in a strange way, with marks of age and time. At that moment, no one knew that this box contained something far more horrifying than anyone could imagine: a vengeful spirit. When the woman opened the box, all she found was an old bottle of wine, a few random trinkets like a hair comb, a small pocket watch that had stopped working, and a small piece of paper with strange Hebrew writing. But as soon as she touched the box, a cold wind suddenly swept through the room. Strangely enough, after bringing the box home, she began experiencing bizarre occurrences that she couldn't explain. The box would emit a foul smell every morning. Dark shadows seemed to move around the corners of the room, and strange noises kept her awake for weeks. However, things took a truly terrifying turn when she realized the box wasn't just bringing strange events into her life. It contained an evil spirit. She began to lose control of her own mind as nightmarish visions plagued her, and horrifying whispers haunted her in the dark. Each time she opened the box, more bizarre occurrences unfolded. Cold winds would sweep through her home, shadows would shift in the corners of the room, and on one occasion, she saw objects around her move on their own. From that point on, the story of the Dybbuk Box began to spread. A man named Kevin Manus, who owned an antique shop, heard about the box and decided to purchase it. Initially, he didn't think much of it, assuming it was just an old trinket, but after receiving it, he started noticing strange changes in himself. Manus began experiencing recurring nightmares about an ugly woman, her hideous face filled with hate, staring at him from the shadows. His body felt heavy and exhausted, as if someone was watching him constantly. After some time, Manus decided to sell the box to rid himself of it, but the horrors didn't stop there. When the new owner of the box began experiencing similar phenomena, a terrifying story had officially begun. Each person who owned the box began encountering terrifying events, relentless nightmares, physical deterioration, and a constant feeling of being followed. No one could keep the box for long without it affecting their mental and physical health. Things took a darker turn when the box was sold to another man, and he began documenting his strange experiences on an online forum. He described being surrounded by dark shadows, hearing whispers coming from the box, and seeing strange lights in his house late at night. Objects in his home would shatter for no reason, and inexplicable events seemed to happen on a regular basis. In 2004, the story of the Dybbuk Box continued to attract public attention, as people started noticing eerie connections between the box and the terrifying events that followed it. Every person who had owned the box had suffered tragic events beyond their comprehension, and one of the last people to sell it said they could feel the presence of an evil spirit trying to escape from the box. But no one truly knew who this spirit was or why it was imprisoned in the box. Some believed it was the spirit of a Jewish woman who had died in a concentration camp during World War II. Others believed that the box had been cursed by a Jewish sorcerer in the past, who had used it to imprison a malicious spirit. One thing is certain: the Dybbuk Box is not just an antique. It is a gateway to nightmares. A small object, yet it holds an unimaginable supernatural power that no one dares to touch. Anyone who has opened this box has not returned the same, and the story continues to haunt anyone who dares to delve into its mysteries. The Dybbuk Box story remains unsolved. Is it an elaborate hoax? Or is there truly a supernatural entity trapped inside it? One thing is certain: the Dybbuk Box is not something you want in your home, because no one knows what it may bring, except that it will never be something good. Sarah always felt like something was off in her small apartment. She had lived there for over a year, but every night, an unsettling sensation of being watched made her shiver. At first, she dismissed it as mere imagination, but soon, strange occurrences became more frequent. Every night, as she lay in bed, the dim glow of her nightlight cast long, shifting shadows on the walls. But sometimes, there were shadows that didn't move when she blinked. They stood still, unmoving, yet she could feel their gaze piercing through her. One night, Sarah awoke at 3 a.m., her heart pounding as if she had just escaped a nightmare. As she opened her eyes, a tall, dark figure stood right beside her bed. It had no eyes, no face, but she could feel it staring straight at her. She tried to scream, but her throat tightened. No sound escaped. Her body was frozen, as if an invisible force was pinning her down. The shadow drifted away, vanishing into the wall before Sarah could react. She gasped for breath and switched on the lights, but everything in the room remained unchanged. Yet the air was freezing, so cold she could see her breath in the dim light. After that night, the shadows appeared more often. Sarah would catch glimpses of them from the corner of her eye while cooking, watching TV, or brushing her teeth. One evening, while washing dishes, she heard a whisper right by her ear. The voice was indistinct, but it sent chills down her spine. She spun around. There was no one there. Terrified, Sarah confided in her best friend, Jake. A skeptic, Jake laughed and dismissed her fears. "You're just stressed. There's no such thing as shadow people." But that night, when Jake stayed over, he saw something. As he lay on the couch, an eerie heaviness filled the air. When he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow standing in the hallway, motionless. It was tall and indistinct, yet undeniably human-shaped. Jake blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, Jake looked pale and shaken. "Sarah, something is seriously wrong with your place." Sarah started researching the shadow people, and what she discovered unsettled her even more. Thousands of people around the world had reported seeing the same dark figures. Some believed they were interdimensional beings, while others thought they were lost souls, trapped between life and death. But all accounts shared one terrifying truth. Once you see them, they never leave. Sarah tried everything to ward them off. Lighting candles, hanging protective charms, reciting prayers, but nothing worked. They were not afraid of the light. They did not disappear when she prayed. They simply stood there, silently watching her. One night, as Sarah lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she glanced at the mirror across the room, and her blood ran cold. In the reflection, a dark figure stood behind her. She spun around, nothing was there. She looked back at the mirror, and the shadow remained. From that night on, the shadows moved closer. At first, they lingered in the corners of her room. Then they stood at the foot of her bed. Then right beside her as she slept. One night, she woke up to find a shadow sitting on her chest, its empty face hovering inches from hers. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it to go away. When she finally dared to open them, it was gone. But the worst night was yet to come. One evening, as Sarah was drifting off to sleep, she heard a whisper right beside her ear. "Don't open your eyes." But instinct took over. She couldn't help herself. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow right in front of her. So close she could feel its icy presence. It leaned in closer, and for the briefest moment, she saw two glowing eyes in the darkness. And then, it was gone. After that night, Sarah never saw them again. But she never shook the feeling of being watched. She knew they were still there, hiding just out of sight, waiting for the right moment. Because once you've seen them, they never truly leave. They only hide in the dark, right behind you. It started as a faint vibration, an almost imperceptible hum that lingered in the silence of the night. At first, only a few people heard it. Strange reports from different corners of the world. A low-frequency droning sound, unlike anything natural, resonated through their homes, through their skulls, through their very bones. No one knew where it came from. No one knew how to stop it. Emma first noticed it one autumn night in Taos, New Mexico. Lying in bed, she felt an unsettling pressure in her ears, followed by an unrelenting, low-pitched hum. It wasn't loud, yet it was inescapable. She got up, checked the appliances, stepped outside to listen. The world was silent. No cars, no distant machinery, just the ever-present hum, pulsating deep within her head. She wasn't alone. The next morning, she mentioned it to her neighbor, an elderly man who had lived in Taos for decades. He stiffened and looked at her with wary eyes. "You've heard it now, haven't you?" he murmured. "Once you hear it, you can't unhear it." Emma scoured online forums and scientific reports, only to find scattered accounts of others who suffered the same fate. From the rolling hills of England to the remote towns of Canada, reports of the hum spanned continents. Yet no two descriptions were identical. Some heard a steady drone. Others described it as a throbbing pulse. Some felt vibrations through their skin, while others were driven to madness, their nights plagued by an unending torment that no earplugs could silence. Experts were baffled. Some blamed electrical grids, underground military tests, or the distant echoes of seismic activity. Others whispered of government conspiracies, secret sonic weapons, or something far more sinister. Something that lived beneath the earth, waking from its ancient slumber. Emma's nights became unbearable. The hum wasn't just a sound. It was a force pressing against her skull like an unseen weight. She found herself growing restless, her thoughts fraying, her sleep disturbed by fragmented dreams of something massive stirring beneath her town. The hum was getting louder. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she ventured to the outskirts of town where the noise seemed strongest. She wasn't alone. A group of people stood gathered in the dark, their eyes hollow, their expressions weary. They too had heard it, and they too had been drawn here to the source. The ground trembled, the hum deepened, and then, for the first time, the hum wasn't just a sound. It was a voice. The air grew dense as the vibrations turned into something more structured. Words, though not in any language Emma had ever heard. A deep, guttural resonance, like something ancient and inhuman, filled the air. The group froze, their breath stolen by an unseen force. Emma clutched her head as the pressure intensified, forcing her to her knees. Her vision blurred, but she could see the others experiencing the same agony. And then, the earth beneath them cracked. A fissure opened, and from within, something moved. It wasn't visible, not in the way one perceives physical shapes, but it was there. An immense presence shifting in and out of reality. The hum was not just a phenomenon. It was a call, and now something was answering. Emma struggled to back away as shadows poured from the opening, writhing like smoke, coiling around the legs of those gathered. Some screamed, others stood in silent horror as their bodies trembled, consumed by the sound. The hum reached its peak, reverberating through every fiber of their beings. Then, as suddenly as it had escalated, it stopped. The air was silent again. The fissure sealed itself, as if it had never been there. The gathered group stood motionless, their faces pale, their eyes void of expression. Emma gasped for breath, looking around frantically. The people around her turned one by one and walked away without a word, their movements stiff, mechanical. She tried to call out to them, but they did not respond. That night, Emma returned home, but sleep never came. She lay awake, listening to the silence, dreading the moment the hum would return. And when it did, because she knew it would, she feared she would not be the same person who had first heard it. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some sounds should never be answered. It began on a cold November night in 1966. In the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, something unnatural took flight in the darkness. It was first seen by two young couples driving through the abandoned TNT area, a remote, overgrown maze of concrete ruins left behind from World War II. What they saw that night would haunt them forever. A pair of glowing red eyes reflected in their headlights. A towering figure, at least 7 feet tall, emerged from the shadows. Its massive wings unfurled, stretching nearly 10 feet across, as it let out an unearthly shriek. The creature suddenly launched into the air, keeping pace with their speeding car, effortlessly gliding above them as they raced away in terror. The couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette, arrived breathless at the Point Pleasant police station. They told their unbelievable story to Deputy Millard Halstead, who knew them as respectable, level-headed individuals. Skeptical but intrigued, the officer followed them back to the TNT area. He found no trace of the creature, but the couples insisted that they were not mistaken. That was only the beginning. Over the next 13 months, more than 100 people reported seeing the creature. It always appeared at night, often near the TNT area or hovering over the Silver Bridge. Witnesses described the same thing. An enormous humanoid figure with glowing red eyes, its presence accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread. Some people who encountered it suffered from strange symptoms afterward: burning eyes, unexplainable nightmares, and a deep feeling of foreboding. Mary Heyer, a local journalist, began covering the story as reports flooded in. She received visits from strange men in black suits, warning her to stop writing about the Mothman. These men, with their emotionless expressions and unsettling presence, only added to the growing paranoia in the town. John Keel, a journalist and paranormal investigator, arrived in Point Pleasant to document the sightings. As he interviewed witnesses, he found a disturbing pattern. Many of them reported receiving cryptic phone calls filled with eerie noises, static, and distorted voices. Some even claimed to hear strange messages warning of an impending disaster. The deeper Keel dug, the more surreal the story became. Some witnesses believed the Mothman wasn't acting alone. Reports of strange lights in the sky, UFO sightings, and encounters with enigmatic figures dressed in black surfaced alongside the Mothman encounters. Many began to speculate that the creature was not of this world, that it was either an alien entity or a harbinger of extraterrestrial forces watching over Point Pleasant. Then, on December 15, 1967, tragedy struck. The Silver Bridge, packed with holiday traffic, suddenly collapsed into the icy waters of the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives. Witnesses later claimed they had seen the Mothman perched on the bridge in the days leading up to the disaster. Some believed it was a warning, an attempt to alert the town to the impending catastrophe. Others feared it was something far more sinister, an omen of death, or perhaps even the cause of the collapse itself. After the bridge collapse, sightings of the Mothman nearly ceased. The once terrified residents of Point Pleasant were left with unanswered questions. Was it a guardian or a harbinger of doom? A misunderstood entity trying to communicate, or something that thrived on chaos and destruction? Theories abound. Some believe the Mothman is an interdimensional being, slipping through the cracks of reality. Others think it is connected to UFO activity, as many unidentified flying objects were spotted in the area during the same time. Cryptozoologists suggest it could be an undiscovered species, an ancient creature forced from its habitat by human activity. One particularly chilling theory suggests that the Mothman is an entity that feeds off fear and tragedy, manifesting before disasters to absorb the psychic energy of the terrified. If true, this would mean that sightings of the Mothman are not warnings, but omens of something inevitable. In the years following the incident, the legend of the Mothman only grew. Books, documentaries, and movies cemented its place in American folklore. Point Pleasant even embraced the creature, erecting a statue in its honor and hosting an annual Mothman festival. But despite the commercialization, the fear lingers. Many skeptics dismissed the Mothman as mass hysteria, an elaborate hoax or misidentified wildlife, possibly a large owl or crane. However, the sheer number of reports, along with the eerie details surrounding them, make it difficult to completely dismiss the phenomenon. To this day, paranormal investigators continue to search for clues, combing through the forests and abandoned areas around Point Pleasant, hoping to capture definitive proof of the Mothman's existence. And then, there are the more recent sightings. In 2016, a man driving through Point Pleasant claimed to have photographed the creature once again. The blurry image showed a winged figure perched on a tree branch, its eyes glowing eerily in the dim light. Others have reported glimpses of a similar figure along remote highways, its glowing eyes watching them from the darkness before vanishing into the night. Some believe that the Mothman is drawn to places of impending disaster. Reports of similar creatures have surfaced in different parts of the world. In Germany, a creature known as the Freiburg Shrieker was seen shortly before a mine collapse in 1978. In 1999, people in Moscow reported sightings of a winged humanoid before the Russian apartment bombings. Could the Mothman be a universal omen of catastrophe, appearing only when tragedy is imminent? A truck driver passing through West Virginia in 2020 reported a terrifying encounter. While driving late at night on an empty stretch of road, his radio suddenly filled with static. The air became thick, suffocating. Then, in his headlights, he saw it. A tall, dark figure with piercing red eyes standing motionless on the road. He slammed on the brakes, but before he could react, the figure spread its massive wings and took off, disappearing into the black sky. The man refused to drive through that route again. Could the Mothman still be lurking, waiting for another disaster to strike? To this day, travelers on lonely roads sometimes swear they see two glowing red eyes staring back at them from the shadows. A rustling in the trees, a strange feeling of being watched, an inexplicable sense of doom. The Mothman has not been forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, it's still out there waiting for the next disaster, the next tragedy, the next time it needs to be seen. In the dim glow of flickering fluorescent lights, Lisa stepped into the elevator of her apartment building, heart pounding. She had spent hours researching the elevator game, a mysterious urban legend originating from Korea, rumored to transport players to another dimension. Despite her skepticism, a part of her yearned to experience something beyond the mundane. Clutching her phone, she took a deep breath and pressed the button for the 4th floor, initiating the ritual. The rules were simple yet unsettling. The player must enter an elevator alone, visit floors in a precise sequence, 4, 2, 6, 2, 10, and upon reaching the 5th floor, a mysterious woman might enter. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as the elevator ascended. The air grew heavier, as if unseen eyes were watching. The doors slid open on the 4th floor, empty. She pressed the button for the 2nd floor, glancing at her reflection in the elevator's polished metal walls. She looked pale, her own eyes seeming more hollow than usual. As the elevator moved, an eerie static filled her ears, though her phone had no signal. The doors opened to the 2nd floor, revealing an identical empty hallway. Her fingers trembled as she continued, pressing the 6th floor. The elevator shuddered slightly, as if resisting. When it reached the 6th floor, she felt an unnatural silence press against her ears, suffocating and deep. The hallway was dark, as though the lights had been swallowed by shadows. Lisa swallowed hard and pressed the button for the 2nd floor again. The air thickened as she descended. Every movement, every second felt elongated. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin clammy. When the elevator arrived at the 2nd floor, the doors hesitated before opening. The hallway outside seemed different. The colors duller, the atmosphere heavier, like a faded memory of the real world. She hesitated but continued, pressing the button for the 10th floor. The elevator lurched upward, and Lisa's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The air smelled faintly of burnt metal. The buttons flickered erratically, though she hadn't touched them. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, she was met with an unnatural crimson sky stretching endlessly above a lifeless cityscape. The building stood skeletal and abandoned, roads cracked as if untouched for centuries. Her instincts screamed at her to stay inside. The legend warned that those who stepped out might never return. But curiosity clawed at her. She stepped forward hesitantly, her foot hitting solid ground. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind moved. She turned to glance back at the elevator. Its doors remained open, beckoning her to return. A deep unease spread through her chest. A distant sound echoed, faint, rhythmic footsteps. Lisa spun around, scanning the emptiness. Then, from the far end of the street, a figure emerged. At first, it was nothing more than a silhouette, but as it neared, she saw it was a woman. The same woman the legend warned about. Her face was obscured by long, tangled hair, and she walked with an unnatural stiffness. A low whisper curled through the dead air, unintelligible but distinctly calling Lisa's name. Panic surged through her. She whirled back to the elevator, lunging toward the doors. The moment she stepped inside, she slammed the button for the 1st floor, her breaths ragged and uneven. The woman's footsteps quickened. Just as the doors began to close, Lisa saw her face, if it could be called a face. Hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth stretched too wide, revealing nothing but endless darkness. The doors shut. The elevator trembled violently as it descended, as if something was clawing at it from the outside. The lights flickered, the panel buttons flashing in a chaotic pattern. Her reflection in the metal walls distorted, her own face shifting, stretching, her eyes replaced by the void. Lisa shut her eyes, whispering desperate prayers. When the elevator finally stopped, she collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The doors slid open, revealing the familiar lobby of her apartment building. But something felt off. The atmosphere was thick, unnatural. The receptionist's desk was empty, and the usually bright lights seemed dimmer. Lisa stepped out cautiously. The lobby appeared identical to what she knew, yet something was undeniably wrong. She turned to look at the elevator. The floor indicator blinked erratically before stopping at an unfamiliar symbol. The doors remained open, leading to nothing but pitch-black emptiness. The rules said to never look back. Lisa forced herself to move forward, each step heavier than the last. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket. She yanked it out, expecting to see a barrage of missed messages or calls. Instead, the screen was filled with static. Then, through the distortion, a single message appeared. "You shouldn't have left." A choked breath escaped her lips. The room spun. The elevator doors slammed shut behind her with a deafening finality. She wasn't sure if she had truly escaped, or if she had merely stepped into another version of reality, one where she would never truly be alone again. As she walked toward her apartment, each footstep echoing eerily in the silence, she noticed something strange. The hallway leading to her unit seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly into the dim distance. The doors to other apartments were all slightly ajar, their interiors shrouded in darkness. She could feel eyes on her, unseen figures peering through the cracks. Reaching her door, she fumbled with her keys, hands slick with sweat. As she pushed it open, she felt a presence behind her. Turning her head ever so slightly, she caught a glimpse of something standing at the far end of the hall. An elongated shadow, impossibly tall, shifting and twisting unnaturally. It whispered her name, the voice dry and brittle like crumbling paper. She shut the door and locked it, backing away. Her apartment seemed normal at first glance, but as she scanned the room, her breath caught. The framed photos on the wall had changed. The images of her friends and family were blurred, their faces smudged out as if something had erased their identities. And in the reflection of the darkened television screen, she saw her own face, expressionless, staring back at her with hollow, unblinking eyes. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The village of Ravenswood had long been shrouded in a silent dread, its people whispering stories about the abandoned asylum on the hill. It was a place of tragedy. Decades ago, the patients and staff inside had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cold, hollow building that seemed to breathe with the wind. Over the years, those who dared step inside either never returned or came back, changed. Mark Holloway, an investigative journalist, had heard the legends and dismissed them as superstition. He prided himself on exposing the truth, tearing down myths with hard evidence. Armed with his camera, flashlight, and a voice recorder, he set out on a cold October night to document what lay inside. The asylum doors creaked open as though welcoming him. The air inside was thick, damp, carrying a scent of mold and something metallic, something like blood. His footsteps echoed through the vast, decayed corridors, the peeling wallpaper revealing claw-like scratches beneath. As he lifted his camera, the lens fogged up, as if someone had breathed on it. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like wind sifting through cracks in the walls. But as Mark moved deeper, they became distinct, voices murmuring, overlapping. He turned on his recorder, pressing it close to the darkness ahead. "Who's there?" he called out. The whispers stopped. The silence was worse. Then the recorder crackled to life. Mark, his own name, whispered back at him. He turned sharply, flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Shadows stretched unnaturally, shifting even when he stood still. He swallowed hard, forcing himself forward. He found an old patient file lying on the ground, dated 1953. The photo attached was of a man. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, eerily familiar. The name below it made Mark's breath hitch. Mark Holloway. No, he muttered. It had to be a coincidence. A sick joke. A loud bang echoed from down the hall. His flashlight flickered. Something darted past the doorway ahead. A figure, moving impossibly fast. Heart pounding, Mark chased after it, reaching a vast room filled with rusted hospital beds. The air was freezing now, his breath visible in the dim light. Then he saw them, figures standing at the far end of the room, their faces obscured in shadow. Silent, motionless, watching. Mark lifted his camera with trembling hands. Through the lens, the figures were clearer. Patients in hospital gowns, their eyes hollow voids, and at the center of them stood a man. His own face staring back at him, but twisted in a grin too wide, too unnatural. Leave. The thing that wore his face whispered. Mark stumbled back, heart hammering. He turned to run, but the hallway behind him had changed, stretching into endless darkness. His flashlight died. The whispers rose again, louder, surrounding him. Then, a breath against his ear. You're home now. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps as he forced himself to move, even as the shadows seemed to close in. His mind screamed at him to leave, but his body wouldn't obey. The walls pulsed, the air thickening like congealed blood. He stumbled forward, gripping the recorder like a lifeline. A sudden rush of static erupted from the device, followed by a voice. Not his own, but chillingly familiar. You never left. Mark's heart pounded. His thoughts became disjointed. He had entered the asylum, hadn't he? But now, as he stared at the crumbling walls, flashes of memory returned. Fragments of something he couldn't explain. Patients screaming. Hands dragging him down darkened corridors. A reflection that wasn't quite his. He clutched his head, his knees buckling. The figures watching him from the shadows stepped closer. One by one, their obscured faces twisted into something horrifying. Stretched skin, grins splitting wider than humanly possible, blackened voids where eyes should be. Then the whispers stopped. Silence swallowed the room, the air crackling with unseen energy. Mark raised his head, his body frozen with fear. The thing wearing his face stepped forward. And this time, it wasn't just a reflection. It was him. You've been here before, it murmured, reaching out. And you'll be here forever. Mark tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The air around him thickened, pressing into his chest like unseen hands. He clawed at his own face, as if trying to tear away something unseen, something not his own. The thing smiled. Its features shimmered, shifting, distorting until it looked exactly like him. Mark felt himself pulled backward, weightless, as though falling through the void. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was his doppelganger stepping into his body, adjusting his stolen skin like a well-worn suit. The next morning, Mark's friends found his camera outside the asylum, its last recording nothing but static. Mark Holloway was never seen again, but the villagers, they swore they saw him, in the asylum windows, smiling, waiting, and sometimes late at night, if one listened closely near the asylum gates, they would hear whispers calling out a name that changed. First, it was Mark Holloway, then it was theirs. The old apartment on Blackwood Street had always carried an unsettling reputation. Tenants came and went, most leaving without a word, as if trying to forget something. The landlord, an elderly man with sunken eyes, never questioned them. He only whispered a warning to each new renter. Don't look into the mirror after midnight. When Daniel Carter moved in, he dismissed the warning as nothing more than an urban legend. A struggling artist, he had no patience for superstitions. The apartment was cheap, spacious, and most importantly quiet, a perfect place to work. The only mirror in the apartment was an old, tarnished one in the bathroom, its silver frame chipped and rusting. It gave Daniel an odd feeling, but he ignored it. For the first few nights, everything was normal. He painted late into the night, occasionally glancing at his reflection while washing his brushes. But on the fourth night, something changed. As he reached for the faucet, he noticed his reflection hesitated. Just for a second. Not much, just a fraction of a moment. But it was wrong. Daniel frowned, rubbing his eyes. "I'm just tired." The next night, he tested it. He moved his hand slowly, watching the reflection carefully. It followed perfectly. He laughed at himself, shaking his head. Paranoia. At exactly 12:03 a.m., he walked past the bathroom again. And this time, he heard it. A soft, wet sound, like someone breathing through their teeth. The light was off, but the mirror wasn't empty. A figure stood inside it, facing away. Daniel's breath hitched. He turned on the light. The mirror showed only his reflection, the same as always. He told himself it was just a trick of the mind, a leftover fear from the landlord's ridiculous warning. Still, that night he slept with the bathroom door closed. Over the next week, the disturbances grew worse. One night, he brushed his teeth absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on the mirror. His reflection did the same, but when he turned to spit into the sink, the reflection kept watching him. He froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. Slowly, he looked back at the mirror. The reflection was normal again. That night, he covered the mirror with a sheet. But at 3:14 a.m., a muffled whisper dragged him from his sleep. "Daniel!" His stomach twisted. The voice was thin, warped, like a recording played backward. The sheet over the mirror had slipped to the floor. The mirror was uncovered. Something inside the glass was watching him. A dark silhouette stood behind his reflection, tall and wrong. It was grinning. Daniel barely slept the next day. He scoured the internet for stories of haunted mirrors, possession, anything to explain what was happening. None of it felt real until he found an old newspaper article from 1987. Local artist disappears under strange circumstances. Last seen in Blackwood Street apartment. The article described a man named Elliot Graves, a painter who had lived in Daniel's apartment decades ago. He had told friends that his reflection had started behaving strangely, moving on its own. They had dismissed him until he vanished. The only thing left behind was his unfinished self-portrait. Daniel's hands shook as he read the last line. The portrait was described as lifelike except for the eyes. Those were hollow, as if the subject had no soul left. Daniel turned slowly toward his easel. The self-portrait he had been working on all week stared back at him. The eyes were empty. His stomach churned. He had no memory of painting them like that. A sudden chill filled the room. Then the mirror shattered. The lights flickered violently. The shards of the mirror trembled, shifting as if something was crawling beneath them. Daniel backed away, his breath coming in quick gasps. The largest shard reflected something that wasn't the room behind him. It showed a different apartment, one identical to his, but darker, lifeless. And standing inside it was a man, Elliot Graves. He was staring directly at Daniel. His lips curled into a wide, unnatural grin. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A sharp, grating whisper filled the air. "I see you." A cold hand grabbed Daniel's wrist. He thrashed, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the overwhelming feeling of being pulled, dragged toward the broken glass. He scrambled for the light switch, heart pounding. When he flicked it on, the room was empty. The mirror was gone. No shards. No cracks. No sign that it had ever been there. His easel stood untouched. But when he turned to his self-portrait, his stomach twisted violently. The painting was different now. It was still him, but now he was grinning. And behind him, in the painted shadows, a dark figure watched with hollow eyes. Daniel bolted from the apartment that night, never returning. The landlord didn't seem surprised when he handed over the keys. As he left, Daniel risked one last glance at the bathroom mirror, now repaired. His reflection smiled. But Daniel hadn't moved his lips. The next tenant moved in a week later. A young woman, bright-eyed and eager. She unpacked her boxes, setting up her new life in the quiet apartment. That night, as she washed her hands in the bathroom, she glanced at the mirror. Something felt off. For just a second, the reflection hesitated. She stared at it, blinking. Then, shaking her head, she turned off the light and walked out. In the darkness, the reflection stayed just a moment too long before turning away. The Hollowbrook Express was a name whispered in fear among railway workers and passengers alike. Once a luxury train in the early 1900s, it had mysteriously vanished one foggy night, along with its passengers and crew. The train was never found, yet strange reports continued to surface. A spectral locomotive appearing along the Hollowbrook line at 3:15 a.m., its windows glowing faintly, filled with shadowy figures. Some claimed they heard distant screams carried by the wind, while others swore they saw passengers staring out, their faces twisted in silent pleas for help. Ethan Carter, an urban legend researcher, had always dismissed these stories as exaggerated folklore. Determined to uncover the truth, he boarded the last train out of Hollowbrook Station on a bitterly cold October night. The platform was empty, save for the distant hum of the wind through abandoned tunnels. He clutched his camera, checking the time, 3:12 a.m. The train arrived in absolute silence.
Nora telinguils, no screeching brax.
It simply emerged from the mist, slowing as if time itself had forgotten it. Ethan hesitated before stepping aboard, his breath fogging in the freezing air. The moment his foot touched the floor, a strange pressure filled his ears. The interior was dimly lit, its antique design preserved in eerie perfection. Velvet seats, golden sconces, polished mahogany walls, all untouched by time. It was beautiful, yet something about it felt wrong. As the train lurched forward, he noticed the passengers. They sat unnervingly still, their faces hidden behind newspapers, hats tilted low. The atmosphere was off. The air smelled of something stale, like dust and decay masked by faded perfume. Ethan raised his camera, snapping a photo of the cabin. When he glanced at the screen, his stomach dropped. The seats were empty. He blinked, heart pounding. The passengers were there, weren't they? He lowered the camera slowly. They were still in their seats, but now their heads turned slightly in his direction, as if aware of him. His pulse hammered. He moved down the aisle, gripping the overhead railing. A conductor appeared ahead, clad in an old-fashioned uniform, his cap shadowing his face. "Ticket, please," the man said, voice a hollow echo. Ethan hesitated. I don't have one." The conductor's head tilted unnaturally. "No ticket." The lights flickered. A whisper coursed through the car, like wind through a graveyard. Ethan's stomach clenched. He needed to get off. He turned back toward the exit, but the door was gone, only a seamless wall of polished wood. The train was speeding up. He stumbled into the next car, nearly tripping over his own feet. It was identical to the last, yet different. Dust coated the seats, cobwebs draped over chandeliers. The once elegant space had decayed in an instant. A rotten stench filled the air. He turned, and his blood ran cold. The passengers were there, but now, their faces were hollow voids, dark pits where eyes should have been. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. Ethan backed away, trembling. The train groaned as if it were alive, the walls narrowing, pressing in. A rhythmic thud echoed from the next compartment, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. He turned sharply as the door creaked open. The conductor stood there, unchanged, but now his eyes gleamed with something inhuman. "You shouldn't be here," the conductor whispered, his voice layered, as if spoken by many. Ethan bolted past him, shoving through the next car. The world outside the windows twisted, dark tunnels looping endlessly, flashes of forgotten faces flickering in the glass. The train had no destination. He reached what should have been the engine car, but But instead, he found a cavernous, endless void, stretching into nothingness. The train was a bridge between worlds, an eternal limbo for those who stepped aboard. A cold hand gripped his shoulder. Ethan whirled around. The passengers were there, crowding around him, whispering in 100 voices. "You are one of us now." The last thing he saw was his reflection in the window. His eyes were gone. The Hollowbrook Express arrived at the station at dawn, empty as always. No one ever noticed the faint outline of a man, staring from one of the windows, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to board. But this time something was different. A railway worker named Daniel had been monitoring the station's security cameras that night. As the ghostly train pulled in, he rubbed his tired eyes, watching with growing dread as the doors slid open. No one stepped off, but just as the train began to pull away, he saw it. A pair of hands, slamming against the window from the inside. A muffled scream echoed through the speakers before the train vanished into the fog. Daniel replayed the footage over and over, unable to shake the horror creeping into his bones. He was about to report it when he noticed something else. Something far worse. The reflection in the station glass showed passengers inside the train. But in the footage, the train was completely empty. That night, Daniel left his post early. He never spoke of what he saw, but he did one thing before disappearing for good. He destroyed all records of the Hollowbrook Express. But some nights, when the fog rolls in thick over Hollowbrook Station, the sound of a train horn can still be heard, long, mournful, and calling for passengers that will never return. In March 2020, when the world seemed to collapse into itself, Emily, a 28-year-old nurse, found herself uprooted. The pandemic had turned hospitals into war zones, and Chicago's streets, once alive with noise, were now ghostly silent under lockdown. Burnt out from endless shifts, she couldn't afford her old place anymore. So, she took what she could get. A cheap apartment in a crumbling brick building on the edge of the city. It was nearly empty, most tenants having fled when the restrictions hit. The landlord, a gaunt man with darting eyes, handed her the keys and mumbled, "Don't mind the noises at night. Old places creak." She nodded, too tired to care. Her first night was a blur of exhaustion. She dragged her mattress into the small bedroom, its single window overlooking a rusted fire escape and a sea of dark rooftops. Around 2 a.m., she jolted awake. A faint tapping echoed through the room, sharp, rhythmic, like someone rapping on glass. She lay still, heart thudding, convincing herself it was nothing. She lived on the 4th floor. No trees reached that high, no birds would peck at this hour. Just the wind, she thought, or maybe a loose shutter. She rolled over and forced her eyes shut. The next night, it happened again. The tapping was louder, more deliberate. Tap, 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 like fingernails dragging across the window pane. Emily's skin prickled. She wasn't imagining it. She sat up, the room bathed in the sickly glow of a streetlight filtering through the thin curtain. Her breath hitched as she debated looking. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, a mantra to steady her nerves. But curiosity or dread won. She crept to the window, fingers trembling as she gripped the curtain's edge. She yanked it back. There, pressed against the glass, was a face. Pale as bone, eyeless. Its mouth hung open in a slack, silent scream. No body attached, no hands to explain how it hovered there. Just a head, floating in the void beyond her window. Emily shrieked, stumbling backward, her hips slamming into the nightstand. The lamp crashed to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, dialed 911, her voice shaking as she stammered, "Someone's outside my window, 4th floor. Please hurry." The police arrived 20 minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the night. They found nothing. No ladder, no smudges on the glass, no footprints on the narrow fire escape. The officer, a gruff man with a clipboard, eyed her skeptically. "You sure you saw something? Stress does funny things." Emily nodded, insistent, but doubt crept in. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Maybe her mind was breaking under the strain. They left, and she locked the window tight, shoving a chair under the bedroom door for good measure. But the tapping didn't stop. Night after night, it returned. Sometimes soft, teasing, other times a frantic staccato that rattled the frame. She stopped looking, afraid of what she'd see, but the image of that eyeless face burned into her skull. She'd lie awake, covers pulled to her chin, counting the taps like a twisted lullaby. Then one night it changed. The tapping paused, and a voice slithered through the silence, low, garbled, like it came from underwater. "Let me in," it rasped. Emily bolted upright, sweat soaking her shirt. The words came again, clearer. "I'm so cold. Let me in." She couldn't take it anymore. The next evening, she borrowed a friend's old phone, set it to record video, and propped it on the sill, lens aimed at the glass. "Proof," she muttered, "or I'm losing it." She barely slept, the tapping a relentless drumbeat in her ears. At dawn, she snatched the phone, hands shaking as she played the footage. The first few hours showed nothing, just the curtain swaying faintly in the still air. Then, at 3:17 a.m., it started. Top, top, top. A shadow slid across the glass, slow and deliberate. The face appeared, pale, eyeless, its mouth twitching like it was chewing something invisible. The audio crackled, and that voice hissed through. "Let me in. I'm so cold, please." The face pressed closer, smearing the glass, its empty sockets seeming to stare right into the camera. Emily didn't pack. She just left. She broke the lease, threw her keys at the landlord, and stammered something about moving closer to work. He didn't argue, just watched her go with those tired, knowing eyes. "You're not the first to see it," he said as she reached the door. She froze, turning back. "What?" He shrugged. "Folks on for always complain. Building used to be a hospital, burned down in '58. Lot of them died up there, trapped. Windows wouldn't open." He smirked almost cruelly. "Guess some never left." She crashed at a friend's place after that, refusing to be alone. But the face followed her. She'd catch it in fleeting glimpses, reflected in a car window as she walked by, flickering in her phone screen when she scrolled too late, even staring back from the bathroom mirror once, its mouth moving silently. She stopped sleeping with windows open, stopped looking out at night. Last she checked, the apartment sat empty again, rent slashed even lower. She wonders who's next, who'll hear the taps, see the face, and feel that cold voice begging to be let in. Because Emily knows now, it's still there, waiting, and it doesn't give up. In the bleak heart of London's 2020 lockdown, James Carter, a 34-year-old graphic designer, felt like a ghost haunting his own life. His cramped flat, perched on the 7th floor of a concrete tower block, had once been a temporary stopgap, a cheap lease while he chased freelance gigs in a bustling city. Now, with the world shuttered, it was his entire universe. The streets below, once alive with honking taxis and chattering crowds, lay empty, their silence broken only by the wail of distant ambulances or the relentless patter of rain against his windows. Work had evaporated as clients canceled projects, leaving him with dwindling savings and a growing pile of delivery boxes, pizza cartons, grocery bags, random gadgets ordered in late-night fits of boredom. His flat was a chaotic nest of cardboard, the air thick with the stale scent of isolation. It began on a dreary Tuesday evening in April, the sky a bruised gray, rain streaking the glass like tears. James, restless and hollowed out by days of sameness, ordered a pepperoni pizza through an app, watching the little dot crawl across the map. At 8:42 p.m., the screen flashed, delivered. He waited, ear cocked for the familiar rap on his door. Nothing. Annoyed, he shuffled to the entrance in mismatched socks, cracked it open, and peered into the hallway. It stretched empty before him, the flickering fluorescent light casting jagged shadows on the damp concrete. Wet footprints glistened faintly, trailing off into the dark. But there was no pizza, no delivery guy, just the cold, heavy quiet. He sighed, chalked it up to a glitch, messaged support for a refund, and tried again the next night from a different place. Same result, delivered, but no knock, no food. By the third night, irritation curdled into something sharper. Unease. Lockdown had dulled his senses, but this felt wrong. A crack in the monotony he'd grown to rely on. He ordered again, half out of stubbornness, half to test the pattern, tracking the app with bleary eyes. This time, as he scrolled through a mindless feed on his phone, a sound stopped him cold. A soft, deliberate rustle, like paper dragged across stone. His pulse quickened. He crept to the door, pressed his eye to the peephole. There it was, a plain brown paper bag, unmarked, sitting alone in the hall's dim glow. No logo, no name, just there, an intruder in the stillness. The corridor beyond was a void, the far light buzzing like a dying insect. Curiosity battled dread. James hesitated, hand hovering over the knob, then grabbed the bag, its unexpected weight pulling at his arm, cold seeping through the paper into his skin. Back inside, he set it on the counter under the kitchen's weak bulb, shadows stretching across the cluttered room. He tore it open and recoiled. A slab of raw, bloody meat glistened inside, dark red and slick, dripping onto the chipped linoleum with a wet slap. No wrapper, no note, just flesh, its iron stench flooding the air. His stomach lurched. He gagged, stumbling to the sink. He grabbed a trash bag, shoveled the mess inside with a spatula, and hauled it to the outdoor bin, rain soaking his shirt as he scrubbed his hands raw under scalding water, the sink swirling red then clear. Sleep evaded him that night, the flat's silence oppressive. Around 3 a.m., a smell crept in, rotting thick, like meat left to fester. He bolted upright, heart hammering, and raced to the kitchen. The bin was empty. The meat was gone. His breath caught, eyes darting to the locked door, the windows sealed tight against the storm. He muttered to himself, "A rat? Maybe, or I'm losing it." But the words rang hollow. The next evening, another bag waited. No order placed, no notification, just there, heavier, colder. He stood over it, dread coiling tight, then ripped it open. Bones spilled out, small, brittle, some curved like ribs, others too tiny, too delicate, like a child's fingers or a bird's wing. They clattered across the floor, and he staggered back, nausea rising. He called the police, voice trembling as he explained. 2 officers arrived, their flashlights slicing through the hall's gloom. They poked at the bag, now empty of bones he'd swept up, and scribbled notes with bored expressions. "No prints, no cameras in this dump," one said. "Probably kids messing with you. Get a camera." They left, their footsteps fading into the night. James dug out a cheap security cam from a box of old gear, its red light blinking as he aimed it at the door. He barely slept, the flat's walls seeming to pulse with every creak. At dawn, he checked the footage, hands shaking. At 3 a.m., the hallway light flickered. A figure appeared, tall, hunched, in a stained delivery uniform, cap pulled low. Its face was a blur, like a photo smeared with oil, but its eyes glowed faintly, 2 pinpricks piercing the dark. It didn't knock. It set down a bag and retreated backward, never turning, just watching as it melted into shadow. Terror sank claws into him. The next night, it came closer, caught on camera pressing its blurred face to the lens, those glowing eyes filling the frame, a thin voice rasping through the audio. "Tip me, tip me." The bag leaked something dark, pooling under his door. James stopped ordering, deleted the apps, but the bags kept coming. Meat, bones, once a tangle of matted hair and jagged teeth, wet and gleaming. Each night, the figure grew bolder, its whispers louder. "Tip me," its stench seeping through the cracks. He called his friend Tom, voice cracking, begging to crash at his place. Tom laughed it off. "You're stir-crazy, mate," but agreed. James packed a bag, abandoned the flat, keys left dangling in the lock. He didn't look back as he fled through the rain-slicked streets, the tower block looming behind like a gravestone. At Tom's, he tried to forget, burning the last delivery boxes he'd brought, swearing off apps for good. A month later, the new tenant, Tom's cousin, who'd scoffed at James's tale, texted him a photo. Piles of brown bags stacked outside the flat, dark stains seeping into the carpet, the air thick with rot. "Mate, what's with all these?" the message read. James didn't reply. He deleted it, hands trembling, but late at night, he still hears it, a rustle, a whisper. "Tip me," and wonders if it's waiting patient, somewhere in the dark. In April 2020, as the pandemic tightened its grip, Sarah Nguyen, a 19-year-old college freshman, found herself stranded in her dorm at Westlake University, a small campus in rural Texas. The world beyond her window had unraveled, streets emptied, businesses shuttered, and the campus, once a hive of chatter and late-night cramming, turned into a ghost town. Most students had packed up and fled when lockdown orders dropped, but Sarah couldn't. Her family lived in Oregon, 1,000 miles away, and flights were grounded, roads locked down. She was stuck, alone in a concrete dorm block with peeling paint, a narrow bed, and a single window overlooking a courtyard of dead grass and skeletal trees. The silence was suffocating, pierced only by the wind's mournful howl or the occasional creak of the building settling. Sarah tried to adapt. She'd carved out a corner of her room as a makeshift study. Her laptop balanced on a wobbly stack of psychology textbooks, a cracked mug stuffed with pens she hadn't touched in weeks, a mini fridge humming fitfully in the background. Zoom became her lifeline, tethering her to professors and the dwindling handful of classmates still enrolled. She'd log in early, camera on, forcing a smile to hide the exhaustion etching lines under her dark eyes. Her days blurred into a haze of lectures, instant ramen, and restless naps, the dorm's emptiness seeping into her bones. She'd pace the room sometimes, talking to herself just to hear a voice, the sound bouncing off the bare walls. Her friend Mia, a bubbly psych major with a knack for dark humor, kept her sane through late-night texts. "This lockdown's gonna turn us into lab rats," Mia joked once, and Sarah had laughed, clinging to that thread of normalcy. By mid-April, their professor, Dr. Ellis, a graying man with a stern voice and a habit of muting himself mid-sentence, scheduled a review session for an upcoming exam. The email came late, setting it for 10 p.m., an odd hour that made Sarah pause. She texted Mia, "Weird time, right?" Mia replied, "Yeah, but Ellis is a night owl. See you there." Sarah shrugged, chalking it up to lockdown chaos. Time had lost meaning anyway. That night, she brewed a cup of stale coffee, the bitter scent cutting through the dorm's musty air. She tied her dark hair into a messy bun, pulled on a hoodie, and settled at her desk, the window behind her reflecting the room's dim glow. She logged into Zoom at 9:55 p.m., the screen flickering to life. 8 students popped up in grainy squares. Mia waved, her smile tired but familiar. Others nodded or stared blankly, their rooms a mix of cluttered desks and blank walls. Dr. Ellis's window was a black void, his name tag static, audio off as usual. Sarah adjusted her headset, a faint static buzz tickling her ears. The session began. Dr. Ellis shared slides on Freud's theories, his silence forcing them to guess when he'd unmute. Sarah scribbled notes, fighting the weight of her eyelids, the dorm's stillness wrapping around her like a shroud. Then it shifted. Halfway through, Mia's video froze, her face locked mid-smile, eyes wide, mouth unnaturally still. Sarah frowned, typed "Mia, you good?" in the chat. No response. One by one, the others dropped. Connection issues. They messaged, their squares winking out. Soon, it was just Sarah and Dr. Ellis's blank screen. The chat fell silent, but his name tag kept blinking, like he was typing endlessly. She cleared her throat, voice shaky. Ellis? Hello? Can you hear me?" Nothing. The static in her headset swelled, a low crackle that crawled under her skin. Then, a message appeared, not from Dr. Ellis, but from Mia's frozen account. "Look behind you." Sarah let out a nervous laugh, a reflex against the chill creeping up her spine. "Nice one, Mia," she muttered, glancing over her shoulder. The room stared back. Empty, the door bolted, the window dark against the night, reflecting her pale face. She turned back, but the chat exploded. "Look again. She's there. Don't turn off the camera." The messages flooded in, not from Mia or Dr. Ellis, but from blank profiles. No names, no faces, just text piling up. Her heart thudded, palms slick with sweat. The screen glitched, pixels twisting, and Dr. Ellis's video snapped on. It wasn't him. A woman stared out, pale as ash, eyeless, her mouth moving in a slow, silent rhythm, like a prayer or a curse. Sarah's breath caught, terror pinning her to the chair, those empty sockets seeming to lock onto her. She slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the stillness. The dorm's power cut out instantly, plunging her into pitch black. Her ears rang, then, a soft shuffle, like bare feet dragging across carpet, slithered from the corner. She scrambled for her phone, fingers fumbling, and flicked on the flashlight. The beam swept the room. Nothing, just shadows stretching too long. The air thick with something she couldn't name. She dialed campus security, whispering, "Someone's here. Please, hurry." The line crackled, static drowning her plea, and that shuffling sound bled through the speaker, closer, deliberate. She backed against the wall, light shaking in her grip, until headlights pierced the dark. Security pulling into the courtyard. The noise stopped, leaving only her ragged breathing. The guard, a grizzled man with a weathered face, swept the room with his flashlight. "No one here, kid," he said, eyeing her like she'd cracked. "Power surge, probably. Old wiring." Sarah nodded, too rattled to argue, but sleep evaded her. At dawn, she checked her email. Dr. Ellis had canceled the session at 8 p.m., citing a bad connection. She texted Mia, who confirmed, "Never got a link. You okay?" Sarah's stomach dropped. Her laptop wouldn't boot. Dead, screen black. She hauled it to IT, a nervous freshman trailing her. The tech pried it open, his brow furrowing. Hard drives toast. And this, he pointed to the webcam lens, scratched deep from the inside, gouges no tool could make. No idea how that happened. Sarah moved home that week, stuffing her life into a duffel bag, the dorm's silence chasing her out. She crashed at her parents' house, avoiding mirrors, jumping at every creak. Months later, sorting photos on her phone, she found a screenshot she didn't recall taking. Her on the Zoom call, smiling faintly, timestamped 10:47 p.m. Behind her, pressed against the window, was the eyeless woman, pale and still, mouth open in that silent chant. Her parents didn't believe her when she showed them, blaming stress, but Sarah deleted it, hands trembling. She dug online, found whispers about the dorm, built over an old asylum, abandoned after a patient vanished in the 70s. Her room on the 3rd floor, same as Sarah's. The building stayed empty after she left, lights flickering at night, students reporting footsteps, voices. Sarah stopped joining late calls, stopped sitting near windows after dark. Some nights, she hears it. A shuffle, a crackle, a whisper from nowhere, "Don't turn off the camera," and wonders if it's still watching, waiting for her to log back in. In the quiet town of Ravenswood, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, stood the venerable Blackwood Academy. Established in the late 1800s, the school was renowned for its Gothic architecture, complete with towering spires, arched hallways, and intricate stone carvings. Generations of students had walked its halls, but beneath its esteemed reputation lay whispers of unsettling occurrences. Stories passed down through the years, tales that many dismissed as mere folklore. Chapter 1: The New Arrival. Elena Thompson transferred to Blackwood Academy in her junior year. Her parents' recent divorce had uprooted her from the bustling city life she knew, placing her in this secluded town. As she approached the looming structure of the academy, a chill ran down her spine. The overcast sky and the cawing of distant crows did little to alleviate her unease. Her first day was uneventful, filled with the usual introductions and curious glances from her peers. However, It wasn't long before she noticed the peculiar behavior of the students. Conversations would hush as she approached, and she often caught them casting furtive glances toward the east wing of the school, a section that appeared older and more decrepit than the rest. Curiosity gnawed at Elena. During lunch, she overheard snippets of conversations. "Did you hear it last night? The crying from the east wing. They say she still roams the halls, searching." Determined to uncover the mystery, Elena approached her classmate, Daniel, who seemed more approachable than the rest. "What's in the east wing?" she inquired. Daniel's eyes widened. "You don't know? It's been closed off for years. They say it's haunted by the spirit of a student who vanished decades ago." Elena's interest was piqued. That evening, instead of heading to the dormitories, she found herself standing before the sealed doors of the east wing. The padlock was rusted, and with a bit of effort it gave way. The door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. Stepping inside, Elena was enveloped by an eerie silence. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through cracked stained glass windows. The air was thick with neglect and something else, something intangible. As she ventured further, she noticed old portraits lining the walls, their subjects' eyes seemingly following her. Desks were overturned, papers scattered, as if the occupants had left in haste. Then, she heard it, a soft whisper, almost melodic, echoing down the corridor. "Help me!" Heart pounding, Elena followed the voice to a classroom at the end of the hall. Inside, she found a diary, its leather cover worn with age. Flipping it open, she read the first entry. September 13th, 1923. "I fear I am being watched. Shadows move when no one is there, and the whispers. They call my name." The entries detailed the experiences of a student named Margaret, who believed she was being haunted by an unseen presence. The final entry sent chills down Elena's spine. October 31st, 1923. "I can no longer endure the torment. Tonight, I confront the darkness within these halls." Margaret was never seen again. Determined to uncover the truth, Elena delved into the school's archives. She discovered that Margaret had been a top student, known for her kindness and intellect. However, in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had become withdrawn and paranoid, speaking of shadows and whispers that no one else could perceive. Elena began experiencing similar phenomena. At night, she would wake to the feeling of being watched, her room colder than usual. Objects moved from their places, and the whispers grew more persistent. Seeking answers, she confided in Daniel. Together, they decided to spend a night in the East Wing, hoping to communicate with Margaret's spirit. Armed with candles and a Ouija board, Elena and Daniel sat in the center of the abandoned classroom where Elena had found the diary. The flame flickered as they joined hands, and Elena began the invocation. "Margaret, we seek your presence. We wish to help you find peace." The planchette moved slowly, spelling out, "Danger." A sudden gust extinguished the candles, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, transforming into anguished wails. Shadows coalesced, forming a dark figure at the edge of the room. "Leave now," it commanded. Terrified, Elena and Daniel fled, the entity's chilling presence pursuing them until they crossed the threshold of the East Wing. The next day, Elena confronted the headmistress, Ms. Hawthorne, about their experience. With a heavy sigh, Ms. Hawthorne revealed the truth. In 1923, a teacher named Mr. Grayson had become obsessed with dark rituals, believing he could harness otherworldly powers. Margaret discovered his intentions and tried to stop him. In a desperate act, Mr. Grayson sacrificed Margaret in a ritual, binding her spirit to the East Wing. The school covered up the incident, sealing off the wing and dismissing the staff involved. Determined to free Margaret, Elena and Daniel sought the help of a local historian versed in banishing rituals. They learned that by destroying the objects tied to the original ritual, they could sever the bond trapping Margaret's spirit. Under the cover of night, Elena and Daniel returned to the East Wing, armed with the necessary tools. They located the remnants of the ritual, a collection of arcane symbols etched into the floor, and a blood-stained locket belonging to Margaret. As they began the cleansing ritual, the temperature plummeted. The dark figure of Mr. Grayson's spirit materialized, attempting to thwart their efforts. Shadows writhed, and the walls seemed to close in. Drawing strength from each other, they pressed on, chanting the incantations. The locket burned with an ethereal light before shattering, releasing a surge of energy that dispelled the darkness. A soft, warm glow enveloped the room, and for a brief moment, they saw Margaret's spirit, free and smiling, before she faded into the light. The oppressive atmosphere that had long plagued Blackwood Academy lifted. The East Wing was renovated and reopened, serving as a reminder of the school's tumultuous past and the bravery of those who sought to right its wrongs. Elena and Daniel's bond deepened, their shared experience a testament to the power of courage and friendship. The whispers ceased, but the story of Margaret's salvation became a legend. A true scary school story that would be passed down through generations, ensuring that the darkness would never be forgotten. While Blackwood Academy thrived, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that some shadows still lingered, watching, waiting. But she knew that as long as stories were told and memories preserved, the light would always prevail over the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and chalk dust as I stepped into Westbridge High School for the first time in years. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just a nostalgic detour on my way through town. The school had been abandoned since the late 90s, left to rot after a series of unexplained incidents drove the district to shut it down. Most people avoided the place, whispering about strange lights flickering in the windows or faint screams carried on the wind. I didn't believe the rumors back then. I was a skeptic, a senior who laughed off the ghost stories my classmates swore by. But standing in the empty parking lot now, staring at the cracked facade of the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I pushed open the rusted front doors, the hinges groaning like a dying animal. The interior was a time capsule. Lockers still hung open, papers littered the floor, and faded posters clung to the walls, their edges curling like dead leaves. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, too loud in the stillness. I told myself I'd just take a quick look at my old homeroom, room 13, and leave. It was down the east corridor, past the science labs and the janitor's closet. But as I walked, the air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest like an invisible hand. Room 13 had always been a little off. Back in '95, kids said it was haunted by a student named Daniel Carver, who disappeared during a storm. The official story was that he'd run away. His parents were a mess, and he'd been caught sneaking vodka into class more than once. But the rumors were darker. Some said he'd been locked in the room overnight by a teacher who'd had enough of his antics. Others swore they'd seen his face in the window after hours, pale and pleading. I never saw anything myself, but I remembered how the room always felt wrong. Too quiet, too cold, even on the hottest days. The door to room 13 was still there, its paint peeling in long, jagged strips. The number 13 was barely legible, scratched into the wood as if someone had clawed it on with their nails. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. A faint sound came from inside, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a desk. My rational mind screamed that it was just the wind or a loose pipe, but my gut told me to run. I didn't listen. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Rows of desks, a chalkboard covered in faded scribbles, and a single flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a trapped insect. But something was different. The desks weren't empty. On each one sat a small, crumpled piece of paper, folded into a tight square. I picked one up, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "He's still here." My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed another note. "Don't look behind you." Another. "The walls are listening." The tapping grew louder, faster, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing in the doorway, but it was empty, just the dark hallway stretching beyond. My heart hammered as I stuffed the notes into my pocket, determined to get out. That's when I noticed the chalkboard. The scribbles I'd seen earlier weren't random. They formed a sentence, written over and over in a frantic, looping scrawl. Daniel never left. The words seemed to pulse, growing darker as I stared, as if the chalk were bleeding into the board. A low creak broke the silence. One of the desks shifted, its metal legs scraping against the floor. Then another, and another. They moved slowly at first, inching toward me like animals stalking prey. I backed up, my shoulder brushing the wall. The plaster was cold and damp, but it wasn't just wet. It was sticky, like it was coated in something thick and warm. I yanked my hand away and saw red smeared across my fingers. Blood. It was seeping from the cracks in the wall, pooling on the floor in slow, deliberate streams. Panic clawed at my chest as I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The lock clicked, a sound so final it made my knees buckle. The tapping stopped, replaced by a voice, soft, raspy, and impossibly close. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered, brushing against my ear like a breath. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the desks, now arranged in a perfect circle around me, their surfaces slick with the same blood dripping from the walls. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my voice echoed back, distorted and mocking. The light flickered wildly, casting shadows that twisted into shapes. Hands reaching from the walls, faces pressing against the windows. And then I saw him, Daniel. He stood in the corner, his skin gray and mottled, his eyes black pits that swallowed the light. His mouth stretched into a grin, too wide, too wrong, revealing teeth sharpened to points. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared as the room closed in around me. The floor tilted, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. The blood was everywhere now, rising like a tide, soaking my jeans. I clawed at the door, my nails splintering against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. Daniel's voice came again, louder this time, layered with a dozen others. Students, teachers, voices I recognized from years ago. "You left us," they hissed. "You forgot us." I hadn't forgotten. I just buried it. The fights, the bullying, the day Daniel had begged me to help him and I'd walked away, laughing with the others. The desks lurched forward, pinning me against the wall. The blood was up to my waist now, warm and pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own. Daniel stepped closer, his grin splitting his face in two. "Stay with us," he said, his voice a chorus of screams. The light went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt hands, cold, bony, countless, grabbing at my arms, my legs, my throat. They pulled me down into the blood, into the floor, into something deeper than I could comprehend. I don't know how long I was there. Minutes, hours, years. Time didn't exist in that void, just the endless weight of guilt and the suffocating press of those hands. When I woke up, I was outside, sprawled in the parking lot under a gray dawn sky. The school loomed behind me, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. My clothes were clean, my hands unmarked, but the notes were still in my pocket, crumpled and stained with blood that wasn't mine. I drove away, vowing never to return. But that night, in my motel room, I heard it again, the tapping. Soft at first, then louder, coming from the walls. I turned on the light and saw them. Tiny scratches forming words across the plaster. "You can't leave." I checked out at dawn, moved to another town, then another. It didn't matter. The tapping followed me. The words appeared everywhere, on mirrors, on ceilings, in the steam of my shower. "We're still here." Last week, I found an old yearbook in a thrift store, Westbridge High, class of '95. I flipped through it, my hands shaking, until I reached my class photo. There I was, smiling with the others. But in the background, in the window of room 13, was a face. Daniel's face. And next to him, another. And another. Faces of kids I'd known. Kids who'd vanished over the years, all staring out at me with those black, empty eyes. I burned the book, but it didn't help. Last night, the tapping stopped. Instead, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming up the stairs to my apartment. The door creaked open, and I saw them. Daniel and the others, their bodies twisted and broken, their mouths stretched into those impossible grins. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I knew what they wanted. As I write this, the lights are flickering. The walls are bleeding again. And the desks. God help me, the desks from room 13 are here, arranged in a circle around my chair. I can feel their hands on me, pulling me back. I don't think I'll make it out this time. If you find this, don't go to Westbridge High. Don't look for room 13. And whatever you do, don't forget them. Because they won't forget you. It was a humid summer night when I first heard about the bell tower at St. Agnes Academy. My cousin Mara had been a teacher there until the school closed in 2003, and she swore the place was cursed. She'd called me out of the blue, her voice trembling over the phone, begging me to meet her at the old campus. "I need you to see it," she'd said. "I need someone else to know." I hadn't seen Mara in years, not since she'd started working at St. Agnes and drifted into a shell of herself. Pale, jumpy, always glancing over her shoulder. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The school sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building swallowed by overgrown ivy and shadowed by a crumbling bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, as if bowing under some unseen weight. The windows were boarded up, the parking lot cracked and sprouting weeds. Mara was waiting by the front gate, her flashlight beam jittering across the ground. She looked worse than I'd expected, her eyes sunken, her hands fidgeting with a set of keys she'd kept from her teaching days. "It's the bell," she whispered as we approached the entrance. It never stopped ringing. I laughed it off at first. The school had been abandoned for over 2 decades. There was no electricity, no one to pull the rope, but Mara's expression didn't crack. She unlocked the gate, and we slipped inside, the air growing thick with the scent of mold and something metallic I couldn't place. The hallway stretched out before us, dark and silent, littered with broken desks and faded flyers curling off the walls. Mara led me toward the stairwell at the far end, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. "They said it was a prank at first," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bell would ring at odd hours, 3 a.m., noon, random times. No one could explain it. The rope was tied down, the mechanism rusted shut. But it kept ringing. We climbed the stairs to the second floor, the wood creaking under our weight. Mara's story grew stranger. She said it started in '98, after a student named Clara Henshaw went missing. Clara had been quiet, a loner who spent hours sketching in the tower after school. One night, she didn't come home. The police found her backpack in the bell chamber, but no trace of her. After that, the ringing began, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. Teachers swore they heard a girl's voice in the sound, faint and pleading. The school board dismissed it as hysteria, but Mara said she'd heard it too. "It wasn't just a bell," she told me, her eyes darting to the shadows. "It was her." We reached the base of the tower, a narrow spiral staircase winding up into darkness. The air was colder here, heavy with a low hum that vibrated in my chest. I thought it was my imagination until Mara froze, her flashlight trembling. "Listen," she hissed. And there it was, a faint, metallic chime, echoing down the stairs. My stomach twisted. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was unmistakable. A bell, ringing in a tower that hadn't been touched in years. I tried to rationalize it. Wind, maybe, or a loose piece of metal clanging against the frame. But Mara was already climbing, her steps frantic, and I followed, the hum growing into a steady toll that rattled my teeth. The stairwell was claustrophobic, the walls slick with dampness, and every few steps, I caught a glimpse of something etched into the stone. Scratches, jagged and deep, forming words I couldn't read in the dim light. The higher we went, the colder it got, until my breath fogged in front of me. The bell chamber was small, barely 10 feet across, with a single window letting in slivers of moonlight. The bell hung in the center, rusted and motionless, its rope coiled on the floor like a dead snake. But the ringing was deafening now, a relentless clang that made my ears ache. Mara dropped her flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the room, and that's when I saw it. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them, overlapping into a frantic tapestry of nonsense. No, not nonsense. Names. Clara's name, carved over and over, bleeding into the stone like ink. Mara grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "She's here!" she screamed over the noise. "She never left." The bell swung then. Not much, just a twitch, but enough to make my heart stop. There was no wind, no one touching it. The rope stayed still, but the bell moved, its clapper slamming against the sides with a force that shook the floor. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something soft. I looked down and saw Clara's backpack, or what was left of it. Rotted and stained, spilling pencils and crumpled sketches onto the floor. The sketches weren't normal. They showed the tower, the bell, and a figure. A girl with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into a silent scream. In every drawing, she was reaching out, her hands clawing at the edges of the paper. I dropped them, my hands shaking, and that's when the ringing changed. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was a voice, high and keening, weaving through the tolls. "Help me," it said. "Help me, help me, help me." Mara was sobbing now, clawing at the walls as if she could dig her way out. The bell swung harder, faster, the air thickening with dust and the sharp tang of blood. I grabbed her, shouting that we had to leave, but she pulled away, her eyes wild. "You don't understand," she yelled. "I locked her in. I locked her in that night." My blood ran cold. She hadn't told me everything. Hadn't told me she'd been the last one with Clara, that she'd caught her sneaking into the tower and locked the door as a prank, thinking she'd let her out later. But she never did. The storm hit, the power went out, and Clara was gone. The bell stopped. The silence was worse. Thick, suffocating, pressing against my skull. Then the floor cracked, a jagged line splitting the stone beneath us. Something was rising, black and oily, seeping up like tar, forming hands, arms, a face. Clara's face, twisted and wrong. Her eyes pits of shadow, her mouth gaping wider than any human's could. She didn't speak, but the air screamed for her, a wail that tore through me. Mara fell to her knees, begging forgiveness, but the thing didn't care. It wrapped around her, pulling her down into the crack, and I ran. I don't remember getting out. Just the stairs, the cold, the sound of Mara's screams fading behind me. I collapsed in the parking lot, my lungs burning, and when I looked back, the tower was still, the bell silent. I told myself it was over. I was wrong. Days later, I found one of Clara's sketches in my jacket pocket. A drawing of me, standing in the tower, her hands around my throat. That night, the ringing started again. Faint but growing, coming from my walls, my windows, my skull. I moved, changed cities, burned the sketch. It didn't matter. The bell followed me. Last night, I woke to find scratches on my ceiling. Clara's name, over and over, dripping red. And in the corner of my room, a shadow stood, small and still, watching me with hollow eyes.